What's up? It's your girl Catherine Yancey. Welcome to K.D.Y Live. Subscribe if you have not already subscribed to Disco 100 Radio here on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. We're here talking about sorry that happened to you. Um, our guest today has had a delay of sorts, and it's probably my fault because I unintentionally gave her the wrong address. So she may or may not make it today. We will have to reschedule her if that's the case. But I apologize because it is my fault because I gave the wrong address when I typed it in. So, anyhow, the conversation that we were to be having today was based on abuse of females by other females. It's not something that people talk about a whole lot. Of course, with I'm sorry that happened to you, this is a conversation where we're normalizing the conversation around abuse. So nothing is off limits because everything happens. And it's time for people to stop acting like these things don't happen because they absolutely do. And more often than we like to admit, a lot of times the people who are perpetrating the crimes, and I will say these are crimes because a lot of times when they get presented, they're not presented as crimes. The people who perpetrate these crimes are, in a lot of cases, people that are within arm's reach of the victims, which means they're people that we know and usually know personally. It's usually like a family member or church member or teacher or somebody that has access to us and somebody that the people who are um, our guardians trust with access to us. So we have to be very mindful when we're making decisions about who has access to us, meaning our children, who that is, and not just grant them access because of a title they hold in our lives or a position that we respect them in, that we see them as no threats. It's unfortunate that we do have to look in a more intense way at people to make sure that we are protecting and preserving the safety and purity of our children. But we have to do that. Um, the young lady, I knew that she was a victim because she actually had put it into a song. She's an artist. K.D.Y is, and if you have not followed her, follow her. She has YouTube, IG, all of those things. Stream her music, and that's KEYMEION at K.D.Y. But in one of her songs, she mentioned that she was raped at 9, and it was a female, and she didn't tell her parents at the time, which a lot of people, even the people I've had on the show previously, have expressed. And I also have expressed that in times of the incident in real time, I didn't feel comfortable sharing the abuse with my parents either. Um, it's not something that a lot of people are comfortable doing. And my own daughter told me because she didn't share her situation of abuse, which is that she was molested when she was 5 at the babysitters until she was 25, which is this year. And she had informed me that if I had shared my experience of abuse with her, specifically given her the details of what I endured, then possibly she would have felt more comfortable disclosing what she had gone through before 25, which is 20 years later. So, another point in having this conversation, and I say conversation because I want it to be so normal that people are just like, this happened and it's real. And I want it to become a thing that people who are thinking about doing these acts have to think about before they do them because they know it's going to be talked about in real time. See, the advantage that the perpetrators have now is that we're not talking in real time. My daughter's perpetrator had at least 20 years. Who knows how long he was doing it before she was one of the victims. So if we start to have these conversations, which are necessary, and actually tell our truths as well, because I think part of the problem is that because nobody is revealing what they've gone through, then others don't feel comfortable revealing what they have previously gone through or are presently going through. And we have a responsibility to, I know it's hard, but tell the truth. And that's just what it boils down to, just telling the truth about what we are living or have lived. Um, a lot of discouragement, as people who have shared on the show before have expressed, is that one, when they tell their truth to people that they trust and they think will support them, they don't get the support. They get told that they're not believed. They get told that they're the problem in some manner. And they get told that they should just be quiet and not mess up the other person's life or the family name or something of that nature, when that should be the farthest from our concerns. The safety of the person, the well being of the person who has been attacked needs to be the thing that we focus on more so than preserving the reputation of the person who is doing hideous acts. But because we don't shift the attention to the person who's actually doing the hideous acts, or having in the past, rather, we're here to turn that around these days, then we find ourselves in a position where people just don't feel comfortable telling. And then another issue that we've come across, as expressed by a former guest, is that the justice system is not always on our side when we do come forward. One of our former guests expressed that for almost 8 years of torture by the hands of a family member, and that was sexual abuse and physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse. Um, when they were given justice, justice was a matter of 6 months and 5.5 years probation. So a lot of times it's like, what's the point of going? Um, of going forward with trying to get someone to own up to what they've done if they're only going to be asked to pay 6 months for almost 8 years of inflicting pain and torture in someone's life. But the reason we must still talk regardless of that, and the justice system, hopefully in time, will give out justice that is due. But the point is that we have to continue to talk regardless, because we have to try to prevent the person who has been doing these acts from continuing to do the acts. They generally get more comfortable the more they quote unquote get away with, and their reach gets wider and longer, and they affect those who are vulnerable. Vulnerable, usually somebody in their care, somebody who we trust. I mean, it could be parents. We hear that, unfortunately, over and over again. And I saw a clip the other day where, and I think it is an actual movie, where a mother is scolding her 18-year-old daughter, and she's scolding her because she's pregnant. However, the mother does not understand that she is pregnant because the her stepfather, which is the mother's now husband, has impregnated her. And a lot of times it's the people under our household who are doing these heinous acts, and either we are oblivious to the fact that they're doing them or we're turning blind eyes. Um, my daughter expressed that when she was in high school, a high school classmate had sleepovers. One of the persons who attended the sleepover acknowledged or shared with my daughter that during the sleepover, strangers in the house, the grandfather would come and get the child, who's a high school child at this point, out of her bed in the middle of the night while she has guests and bring her back as if it were a normal thing. And this is with other adults in the house as well. So a lot of times it's a generational thing. And I know people don't like to talk about this stuff, but it's very much real. And we have to start talking about it. Or we keep seeing children pregnant by their fathers or stepfathers. And it shouldn't be, but it is. I know of several people who have expressed, now the example I gave to you all was a movie, but I know several people who have expressed that they themselves or somebody they know closely, a family member, has had sexual contact with a father or a stepfather. And in some of those instances, the result has been a child. And in some of those instances, the result has been multiple children. And the girl was still left in the care of the person who was abusing them, which was their father or stepfather. I hear that, and I'm saying I hear because since I've started, I'm sorry that happened to you. A lot of people have expressed that they can relate to this subject matter because it has happened to them. Um, I hear that parents, mothers in particular, when it gets brought to their attention that their daughters have been molested or sexually assaulted, the mothers in some cases are blaming the daughter, the child, for being enticing, making it happen, giving the man an excuse, something they were wearing or doing. But these are children. And they go on to blame them for messing up their relationship with the perpetrator, the man. So instead of mother being the support for the child, she becomes enemy to her own child and resents the child for bringing forth the truth because now that's messing up her relationship. These are all hard, ugly truths, but they are true to some people. If you have not had the opportunity to know somebody in these situations or experience these situations yourself, then great. But please be aware that these situations exist. And a lot of times people go forward in life and they exert all kinds of behaviors. They act out in all kinds of different ways. And a lot of times it has to do with some kind of trauma they've experienced from their past. And it gets swept under the rug and they're left to kind of deal with and figure through life. And they don't have the proper skills to. A lot of times we just go through life doing what we're taught. We do what we think is best. We make the best of whatever situations we've been given. Um, but a lot of times when we get to be adults, and even before we get to be adults, I can say that even as a teenager, I was very much in a dark place. I was definitely suicidal at some point. I was definitely homicidal at some point and just angry. I was depressed. So, a lot of people who have children who are depressed, please know that that is a real thing. Don't just say your child is not old enough to have those kind of emotions or experiences. Um, they very much probably are. I've heard children as young as 7 or 8 be diagnosed with depression. I heard of children as young as 7 or 8 committing suicide. And suicide is a very real thing as well that a lot of people are dealing with, because they aren't dealing with core issues that need to be dealt with within themselves or their children. I come from a background of not being able to really express what was going on um, in my life or my head. And my head was probably the biggest factor, because sometimes in your head things can be magnified to be bigger than what they are, especially if you're already on a negative slippery slope, which I was at a very young age. I meet a lot of people now and they can't believe that because I am definitely intentional about being positive, but that was not always the case. I was very um, lost. I think that would be the word. Very lost. And part of the reason why I was lost is because I didn't feel that I had anyone that I can turn to and be real with and tell the truth to about what was going on with me, what had happened to me. And it just left me at a young age trying to figure out things that I could not figure out because I had not had enough life experience to figure them out in a positive, healthy manner. But if older people would have shared the things that they had gone through in a realistic way, um, I think that that would have helped me to have been able to cope more with what reality had been in my life. I think that, and definitely I'm not doing a blame game of any sorts here. I'm just saying that we as adults owe it to those who are younger than us to tell the truth about life. Life is not always easy. It just brings things about that we never saw coming sometimes. And it doesn't just happen that way to one person. It usually happens that way to every person alive. Life just not does not go in ABC order and everything is just all good all the time as we're taught that it will be when we grow up if we just go to school and get good grades and we just be, obedient to our parents and we just do those things like get an education and be a respectable person. Life just lines up. And sometimes you can do all of those things and life would just throw a curveball and we have to live life after their curveball, and we don't really have any kind of blueprint to do so because nobody ever shares the curveballs that come into their lives. And we have to definitely start being more comfortable with just telling the truth and transparency and without the fear of being judged. And the only way we can do that if we actually stop judging. So that's a uncomfortable thing for some people because they're always taught, some people are taught that to have the image of being okay and looking okay is all they need. But actually being okay takes work. And we're not always okay because stuff happens to us to take us from that center mark of okay sometimes. Sometimes we can be exceedingly great. Sometimes we can be less than okay. And sometimes we can fall right in the middle and we're okay. But that's not all the time. And what I found growing up is that if I was not okay or exceedingly okay, then the less than okay was not okay. We couldn't talk about it. Um, And maybe we could talk about it, but because nobody else talked about it, then it was kind of understood that we don't talk about it. And that leaves us in a place where we're dealing with mental health issues, which is a very big thing in definitely black communities, but I want to say a lot of communities because a lot of people have secrets, and a lot of people's secrets they want to keep forever, forever, ever, like generations forever. And a lot of times the healing can't come until we let go of those secrets, until we let some light into those dark places. It's uncomfortable, but it gets easier the more we live a truthful and transparent life. Um, Going from being held hostage by your past to being free from your past has to be an intentional thing. And in that process, we can't really be concerned with how other people feel about it. We have to do it for ourselves because there are going to be people who are uncomfortable because of the role that they played in your life to cause some of that discomfort. So it's in their best interest that you stay uncomfortable, and they will probably encourage you to stay uncomfortable. However, for you to live your best life and live on purpose and in purpose, you have to shed all of that weight, all of that dead weight, and you have to get to the core of whatever bondage you have been experiencing. And it usually starts at a very young age for a lot of us. And we go through life trying to be happy, and it proves to be difficult no matter what some of us do, what some of us accomplished, what some of us set out to do for other people, for ourselves internally. We struggle, and we have to be real with ourselves about that. Once we get to the point where we're able to be real with ourselves, tell the truth to ourselves, then we can start our healing journey to actually be free from whatever the thing is from the past that has caused us to be angry, caused us to be bitter, caused us to live a life where we um, are resembling people who have been rejected, abandoned, unloved, and all of those things are being lashed out onto other people who aren't even the source or the cause of the feelings and emotions that they're getting from us. A lot of us go and try to have successful relationships after experiencing some kind of trauma, and we are not successful because we can't, because we first have to deal with ourselves and be whole within ourselves and be able to take our whole selves into a relationship instead of the broken, bitter pieces that remain in us after an incident or multiple incidents or a lifetime of incidents has occurred. Some people, unfortunately, um, are born into situations where they are abused early in life, and the abuse is all they know. Um, it's heartbreaking to even think that that can be the case, but it is the case for many people. We've had guests on, I'm sorry that happened to you, to express that they were abused at very young ages. I know people who were abused as babies. The guest on the show said as young as 3. I know babies who have been abused or people who were abused when they were babies. And it's by their father, it's by someone in the home. Um, I'm sure that there have been situations where the abuser is a female, and that was to be our topic today. But I mentioned earlier that um, I gave out the wrong address earlier, so if Kimyon doesn't make it today, it's totally my fault. But a lot of times there are people who are abused from birth and they're trying to live a life be I don't want to say beyond the abuse, but not beyond the abuse because they haven't really dealt with the abuse. Well, so live a life with the abuse as their foundation. And they take that into a situation where they're trying to build, relationships, and it comes out as just lashing out in anger, lashing out in distrust, and other things that are negative to any relationship being able to thrive. But I totally believe that one, if adults would start acknowledging these situations, then that would allow us to start the healing process of getting help and just being able to talk about these unjust things that are happening to us starting at a very young age for a lot of us. A lot of times, our peace is destroyed early. And people wonder why, this person or that person is so angry all the time, or not even wondering. They're just labeling them as angry, or labeling them as promiscuous, or labeling them as just not going to add up to anything. And they start with what they see on the surface. However, I think in a lot of cases, if we look beyond the surface, then we will see that that person suffers some type of abuse that has never been dealt with, that people have never been honest about. And as a result of that, and sometimes they haven't even expressed that they've been abused. So sometimes it's not on the people around them. They just don't feel comfortable, saying what they've been through. But again, that's probably because nobody ever told them what they've been through to kind of normalize that people go through things that are unscripted. So if we start to stop looking at people's surface level and really want to engage with them on a deeper level to see why people are the way they are, it's normally not anything that has happened overnight that makes them the way they are wholly as a person. It's usually a lifetime of building from something that has allowed a person to develop into what they are. But if we're building from a negative and we keep on compounding on that foundation, the foundation is bad. And at some point, that house crumbles because it has bad foundation. So as we get older, and I think for a lot of older people, um, they just come from a different time. And I think a lot of people did the best that they can do for survival purposes and for maintaining their family in ways they were taught and in manners in which they had no control over in some instances, where they were dependent on other people to take care of them, and that subjected them to abuse or subjected their children to abuse. But because they endured that lifestyle and they have been trained, and I'm speaking of older people, they have been trained to not, I guess, buck the system of survival, which is speaking out about abuse, then they don't want that they're uncomfortable rather with that happening in this newer generation. And it is because there will be a level of exposure for them as well, whether they were the abused or the abuser in some sense. And there has to be some accountability and some responsibility to them for whatever role they played in it, whether it was voluntary or involuntary. And a lot of people aren't ready to have that fall back on them. They want to be good, upstanding, outstanding people in the community, pillars in the community. And again, don't mess up my good name. And I get all of that. But how about our future generations? How about we not mess them up? And how about we just tell the truth at this point? And a lot of the people that are being protected through silence are even dead now. but the silence continues. That has to stop. It just point blank has to stop. Um, a person who put themselves in a position to have a story told about them, regardless if the story is positive or negative, that was their choice. And you own your story. Like now we are making choices going forward with how we are presenting ourselves in life. And if somebody wants to tell, what they are witnessing of us, then we gave it to them to tell. Unless they're embellishing, of course, and telling untruths. But we're not talking about that person. We're talking about somebody who is looking upon us and just telling the truth about our life. If we're living in a upright way and doing things that we're supposed to be doing to be positive people, positive role models, then we shouldn't be so concerned about what people are going to say about us because we've done good things, so they'll say good things. But it's those of us who have not done good things who are trying to behave or pretend as if we're better than what we actually are that are having the problem with people telling the truth. And that has to be stopped because if you made the bed, then that's the bed you made to lay in. So don't get mad because somebody is opting to live beyond what past generations have chosen to live their standards according to. And that would be to just live standards according to the truth. It is what it is. I say that many times. It's one of the phrases that I tend to live by. It is what it is. And we have to take the desire to make things prettier than what they actually are off of the table. Like if it ain't that pretty, it just ain't that pretty. If the culprit is mama, or if the culprit is grandma, if the culprit is dad, if the culprit is granddad, brother, sister, neighbor, teacher, doctor, pastor, deacon, if the culprit is that person, it's just that person. We can't say, "Ooh, we can't say that." That would mess their whole family up, or that would mess the church up, or that would. What about the person they've messed up? Why can't they get the same kind of consideration? Well, we got to help, them get back right. We have to help them patch up the pieces from a situation where they had some innocence taken from them. Why can't we redirect the focus to the people who need our support? And it's not we can't redirect the focus. We definitely can redirect the focus. It's just now that it's time to redirect the focus. We have chosen not to redirect the focus in the past. And I think with a lot of people coming forth, and I don't want to just say the Me Too movement because we're talking about men and women alike. And we're talking about the culprits being more than just men, women as well. And we're not just talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about physical, mental, emotional, verbal abuse as well. We have to start just giving the right support to the right people. We have to start getting the right help to the right people. So, a lot of times, we know that people are doing acts or thinking about doing acts or have some kind of trait that tells us they might do these things. And we just sit back and I don't want to say just pray because everybody's not a praying person, but we don't do anything active to get them help, one, or to make them accountable for whatever it is that they do that's not something that should be done, especially if it's against the law. Um, too often we too often we don't acknowledge that a person is not well. They can exemplify many signs over time, and we want to say, not in my family. And unfortunately, a lot of times it is in our family. A lot of times somebody may have some sexual deviant traits that need addressing, but we're turning blind eyes and not in our family. Maybe someone is showing some aggressive, dominant behaviors that need attention at a very young age. But nope, not our child. So we don't get them the help that they need, and then they turn out to be abusive in some kind of manner. A lot of times we have people who are abused turn into the abuser as well, and we touch on this a whole lot because it's the truth. People act like in some instances they don't know how a person got to be the way that they are. Sometimes you do know how they got to be the way that they are. You witnessed the abuse that they endured, and now they become abusive in their manners, in their nature. And you're like, I don't know how they got to be that way. Somebody needs to do something to them. Well, if somebody had done something to the person who had did something to them, then maybe they wouldn't be as bad off as they are. So we have to start going back, maybe even generations, to get to the core or of what has happened to people to make them the way that they are. A lot of times we just like to start on today. But if we go back to the past to see what has happened to people, then we can't pin everything that they have become just on them. Not that it makes them right. Everybody does have to be accountable for themselves. Everybody does need to have some measure of self control, self awareness. Like you can't just do things in life and then I'm doing it because they made me do it or I'm doing it because it happened to me. Although that may be very true. However, you have a responsibility just like everybody else to live according to the standard that we're supposed to be good human beings to one another. And not even just the standard of the law, just the standard of being good to one another. Unfortunately, everybody is not good natured. Unfortunately, a lot of us, we saw people who were not good natured as they were growing up, and we just let them continue on to that path. We didn't do anything to intervene to help them. We didn't do anything to correct them. We didn't provide alternatives for some people. And when they got to be the way that they are, we ostracized them or we said something when it was way too late. And what we said was only in criticism. You know, you can't believe they do this or can't believe they do that. But you had every opportunity when they were doing the less um, extreme thing to intervene and try to help them go a different direction. And that didn't happen. So, also, a lot of parents who are parenting and they don't want anybody to say anything to their child. You know, the child can't be told anything by a teacher. They can't be told anything by other adults. And, you know, it's like giving them a free pass to just grow up and be reckless. And we're seeing this a lot now. You know, children, teenagers primarily, are just living reckless lives. A lot of them express that they don't even see themselves living past their 20s anyway, because nobody has instilled any self worth in them, any discipline, any guidance, any nurturing. So they don't even see that they're going to be survivors in the world anyway. So they're just out here doing the most, living as recklessly as possible before they die early. But we have to do a better job of guiding our children and instilling in them purpose, instilling in them that they matter, they make a difference in the world before they're out here making negative differences in the world because they think nobody cares. And then as soon as they start doing those things and they get caught up in the world, then the parent who should have had some kind of structure and discipline in place decides that this is the time to have a outcry for help, a plea for help. Help my child. You know, they're a good child. They could have been a good child probably. However, their actions relay that they are not. But why are they not? A lot of times, kids are being verbally abused all the time, talked to any kind of way. Like I said, not given any sense of worth or purpose. And that becomes part of their evolving into the person that they're going to be as an adult. And if they don't think they're worth anything, why should they care about anything or anyone else? So we really have to be conscious and careful about all types of abuse. Verbal abuse is bad. Mental abuse is bad. Sexual abuse is bad. Physical abuse is bad. There is a lot of people think that there is a distinction between them and abusers as long as they're not doing the kind of abuse that can be seen per se, but it's going to be seen in the outward actions of a person eventually. Whoever you've had access to, you're doing some kind of exchange with them. And if it's continuously a negative exchange, then a lot of times, and I say a lot of times because some people or kids will have the tendency to grow up and be the exact opposite of anything negative that has been dispensed into their lives. But many times they become a product of their surroundings or their environment. So we have to be conscious as a community to put positive behaviors, positive mindsets, positive outlooks into people. And not just as kids, it starts as a kid, or it should start as a kid. But sometimes people miss it in that stage just because they're not around the right people to do it. And that's because those people may not have had anyone pouring into their lives positively. So sometimes it takes us as adults to pour into other adults and get people on the right path to getting help, getting professional counseling and things of that nature to actually dig up those things that we have buried inside of us that are keeping us from being our best selves. A lot of times people like to portray that they have it all together when they don't. And that gets to be a pretty hard life to live. And I don't know who in particular this may be for, but you don't have to have it all together. Most of us don't have it all together all the time. You know, we're a steady work in progress, and, you know, we work to be better than we were yesterday for most of us. Some of us, we don't have a clue as to what that is, how to do it, or any desire to do it. But for most people who are healthy minded people, the goal is to get better than you were yesterday. But in order for us to do that, we have to really get down to the core of who we are. And the core of who we are may have some not so great things in there that need to be divulged and dealt with. Um, Counseling does not mean you're crazy. Counseling is definitely something that we need to be more comfortable with. I've learned recently that Walmart has even started offering counseling at their clinical centers, and it's very affordable. So, if nothing else, even if you don't think you need counseling, get counseling. It just allows you to get to the core of you. Um, I remember the first time I went to a counseling session in my early 20s. I didn't even know anything was quote unquote wrong, but the evaluation disclosed that I was severely depressed. And I had no clue that I was depressed at all. And then the diagnosis said severely depressed. So a lot of times we may, but when let me go back. When I learned of being severely depressed, it made a lot of things that I had been experiencing, a lot of emotions make sense. A lot of how I behaved made sense at that point. So when you go to a professional, get counseling, it makes things make sense. It's not to say, I necessarily have a problem, but honestly, most people have some kind of problem. And we have to get over the stigma of having a problem. Um, Whoever says their life is perfect, they're probably lying. There is always something we're going to have to face, regardless of what stage of life we're in. Don't discard that your feelings or your children have feelings that may need attention just because they're young. A lot of people take on the attitude that, for a child, they're being taken care of. They have housing, they have food, they have all of the things that they need. And so they shouldn't have any issues. But their issues are real to them, are valid to them, are big to them. And we have to start to acknowledge that our children are people. People have issues. That's just what happens in life. But if we go through life sweeping issues under the rug, acting like they don't exist as a child because we don't want to admit that we have issues, then it just leads to us having a less of a chance at having a good life later on. And for those who come from a background, and I'm talking to older people now, those who come from a background of sweeping stuff under the rug, at some point you have to go and lift that rug up. You just have to go and lift the rug up, unless you want all the generations after you to keep having to deal with the stuff that's under that rug, because it's going to show up in one form or another. And a lot of times, people in generations down the road are dealing with things that they shouldn't have to deal with if we just deal with them now. Like, I just had a granddaughter this past week. I would not like for anything that I have not dealt with, that needs to be dealt with, to be left for her to deal with later. There's going to be a negative impact on her life and in her life. That would be very selfish of me to do that to my future generations just because I don't want to deal with it now. Because I don't want the shame and stigma that's attached to it. Because I don't want to do the work to fix it. Because I want to seem like I have it all together. That's just not a fair thing. So we have to start with ourselves when it comes to creating a better world, creating a better future. It starts with us first. Creating better family dynamics, creating a healthier family dynamics. I mean, it may get uglier before it gets prettier. That's just part of the process. I am personally dealing with family matters that are uglier. And at some point, when we decide that we can come together and deal with them, then, you know, we'll be healthy, whole, and happy again. Now, I'm healthy, whole, and happy without them acknowledging the things that they need to acknowledge. And I'm going to do that for my chain of descendants. But it sure would be nice if they do it for those of us who have grown up in some dysfunction before they die. However, don't hold your breath waiting on that if you're one of those who are needing that kind of validation and support and fixing the past. You have to do what you can and don't worry about the rest. All right, that has been K.D.Y Live. We are talking. I'm sorry that happened to you. Please feel free to join our group on Facebook. And I'll be here next week, Disco 100 Radio. And this is K.D.Y Live.